Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It is Monday, April 11th. Derek Van Riper here with Eno Saris. On this episode, we will share some opening series observations, including a few disappointing performances from aces, their first time through the rotation. Committees in action. We'll try to make sense of what we saw some of the bullpens around the league do. Had a great question about some larger hitters in the leadoff spot to begin the season. This subject line was Burly Beef Boys batting leadoff, probably a top 5 subject line from the Rates and Barrels email box. We get some other problem players we're going to discuss and what we're looking for in-season management tools this time of year. What are we using to make these micro decisions? Because it seems like I sweat these toss-ups in the lineup more now than I do at any point other than maybe the last 2 weeks of the season when possibly closing in on titles. So what goes into our decision-making process as we make these micro decisions that we're going to make for the better part of the next 25 weeks? Welcome back. It looks like you had a good time in San Diego.
I did. It was expensive, but I had a good time.
Did you go to Legoland?
What's that?
Legoland? Did you
I did not do Legoland. I did not do Legoland because the season started right after Disneyland. So you saw me in Disneyland, and my wife allowed me to sort of hand the children off to her for the end of the week so that I could live blog and watch all the opening day games. So they went to the zoo, which has a new section on bugs, which my youngest loves bugs. So they had a good time. Went to the Natural History Museum and the zoo, and I did a little mini meetup at Lost Abbey. Shout out to anybody who came to that. We had a fun time that night.
Excellent. Well, glad to have you back, and looking forward to looking at some of these topics, including these disappointing aces, because I think there's an overwhelming amount of panic that sets in when you have your first start of the year from your best pitcher, usually someone you took in the first couple of rounds, or if it was an auction, someone you paid $30+ to have on your roster, and they get hit. You see crooked numbers in the box score. You see walk issues. Maybe in some of these cases, we saw some velocity issues. 3 names immediately came to mind for me as I was thinking about the weekend. Brandon Woodruff, his first start of the season against the Cubs on Saturday, just didn't have his typical command. I think that's most of what I'm attributing his disappointing start to. Shane Bieber, I think, was a velo drop guy, and Julio Urías, also a velo drop guy at Coors Field on Sunday. So between those 3 guys or anybody else that really didn't show well their first time out, is there anyone that you're particularly worried about based on what you saw that first start?
Yeah, I really am. In fact, it's easier for me to grab out the guy I'm not worried about. Let me just take Brandon Woodruff out of this discussion, I think. Looked at the stuff numbers, had a 118 stuff, poor location numbers. He doesn't usually have poor location numbers. He talked about poor location after the game. He said it was one of the worst of his career. So it all lines up to me. I think you want to have some narrative. You want to have some story that lines up with it. And so this, in that case, in Woodruff's case, the story and the numbers line up together, and you can say, I think, no problem. Now, I think the story and the numbers are a little bit different when it comes to Shane Bieber. So the story is he was down in velo because it was cold and it was his first start of the year. And in his career, that has been true, that he has had, slower starts velo-wise, and that, in colder velo, he's had a little bit of trouble with colder days. However, last year, for example, opening day, he averaged 92.5 on the four-seamer, and I believe it was 90.9 in this year's start. The stuff numbers are pretty bad. Coming off a shoulder injury. I don't know, man. I know he had a good start numbers-wise, and so people are saying, well, the final line was great, so I don't care. But Bieber, that was against what was it against? The Royals?
Royals, yeah.
Which, that lineup is getting better, but I wouldn't say it's one of the best lineups. And the cold also suppresses balls in play, so you would expect less offense in the balls on that. So that was one that really worried me. And then Urías, dude, he said after the game, he were going like narrative numbers theme that we're going with here. Urías said after the game, it was just a weird start. I don't know what was going on. Just a weird day, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. I looked at his spring numbers, and he was averaging 91.6 in the spring. I didn't notice that. So his stuff plus was near 100, even with the fact that Coors hurts curveballs and his velo was down. So if you wanted me to order them, I'd be least worried about Woodruff and most worried about Bieber.
Seems in line with the way some of the reaction I've seen has been to this point. I think the only thing in the Woodruff start that got me thinking, and I don't know if we've ever really talked about this before, the Cubs were fouling off a ton of pitches. The broadcast brought it up a few times, and I was going to ask you, do you look at foul balls as something that's actually problematic because they're not swings and misses? They're near hits, right? I mean, like they're closer to hits than they are to misses. If we're just kind of thinking about it in a very binary sense. Should we be worried when we see an uptick in foul balls for pitchers over any number of starts? I wouldn't worry about any one particular day, right? If he wasn't locating as well as he wanted to, fine. But I just had never thought about it in the broader context before of whether or not these are actually problematic things to look for.
Yeah, I don't have an organized response for you, so I'm just going to kind of go through some things I know about foul balls. So, for example, foul balls are at an all-time high. I don't know if you knew that. That's sort of it's a league thing. So there is something going on with hitters finding a way to spoil. I know that as in an at bat, as you foul balls off more, the advantage starts to go towards the hitter. So put those two things together, and you're like, oh yeah, I would also try and select for guys who can foul balls off, because as they foul balls off, they get better outcomes in those at bats. And then the last thing I know is that at the extremes, there are players that show the ability to foul balls off and keep that from season to season, but it's a very noisy thing for every given player in any given at bat. So I would say I am not super worried because there's all that noise in it, and it's possibly just a one start freak occurrence. If it starts happening more, then yes, I would say that is not as good as a whiff. We prefer whiffs. Whiffs are clean. They don't result in balls in play. You're right. Those fouls are near hits. But there is something going on in the game of baseball where people are fouling balls off more, and it is advantageous to the hitters to do so.
I just ran a quick search just to see who led the league. What pitcher allowed the most foul balls? Just out of a curiosity thing. Zach Wheeler was number 1 in the league. Robbie Ray was number 2. Sandy Alcantara was 3. Top 10 includes Sean Manaea, Nathan Eovaldi, Walker Buehler, Kevin Gausman, Nick Pivetta, Brandon Woodruff, and Luis Castillo. These are all good pitchers. I mean, part of this is you're going to give up more foul balls if you're in the game longer because you're running your pitch count higher. So there's
some volume there.
From a volume standpoint, yeah. But I was genuinely curious because I never really thought about it as a possible problem.
Yeah, and it's hard to say that, like, oh yeah, those guys sucked. Was there a bad pitcher on that list?
Not anywhere near the top 10. Nick Pivetta is the worst pitcher of that group. I guess the first bad pitcher is Chris Flexen bad. Compared to the other guys, he's kind of like a Pivetta with more contact allowed. Tyler Anderson's in the top 20. Cole Irvin's up there in the top 25. Jordan Lyles is up there.
You know, there's an interesting thing about that group, though. It's not the most standout strikeout rate.
Wheeler, Ray, Alcantara,
Ray has good strikeouts.
Buehler. Yeah, Buehler's a little lighter.
Eovaldi is like one of those players where you're like, why doesn't he miss more bats? Why doesn't he have more strikeouts? Right? Woodruff never had he's never had the 12K9, right?
No, but yeah, these guys are all good strikeout pitchers at this point. Eovaldi's issue was more earlier in his career. He was like a 6 to 7 Ks per 9 guy. Yeah, he's moved on a little bit now, but I think that's fair for the most part.
They're all good pitchers, but they're not the best strikeout pitchers in baseball.
Garrett Cole's on here at 17 18. Garrett Cole's 18th on the list.
It is a funny event because the thing itself, the foul itself, is good for the pitcher.
It's still, I mean, it's a completely positive outcome for the pitcher.
Right. But if you were ranking the positive outcomes, it wouldn't be number one. Either a called strike, and a swing and miss have to be ahead of it, I would think.
Well, more to come here, or a discovery of work done by someone else at some point that explains how important or unimportant something like this actually would be. Aside from the disappointing aces that we saw over opening weekend, we got to see how some teams were deploying their bullpens, and I feel like we got more questions than answers from the opening weekend. Did you have any?
It was just
teams
nauseating, dude. It was just like, oh god, like the Rays. Like, could you just not, like, just for like the opening weekend, just do something that we can figure out. Nope. I thought it was gonna be Fireisen because he was pitching in the ninth, and I was like, oh yeah, it's always gonna be Kittredge in the seventh and Fireisen in the ninth. Yep. This is what they did this before with Fairbanks and Anderson. Yep. And then Brooks Raley comes out to get, and I think there was actually two pitchers after Fireisen. I was just like, man, you guys are gonna kill me.
Well, they came back with Kittredge on Saturday. He got a save. So there's that.
Yeah, I picked up a share of Fireisen. I think he's going to get 5 to 10 saves. So
this is one of the worst parts of in-season management right now, though, is that if you have these relievers that we liked at the end of draft season who you thought were in a committee and maybe only sharing with one other reliever, Jorge Alcala, definitely among those. You see when he comes into the games, the first few days of the season, he's pitching in the 6th or the 7th inning. It's really easy to abandon hope on a player after like 2 games of being that far removed from the 9th inning. And I was trying to decide if the schedule, because we know that opening day for the teams that opened on Thursday, most of those teams were off Friday. There was a built-in rain out makeup day right there, so you don't have to make it up later. So your Thursday usage with an off day Friday might not be your typical usage because you can rest everybody and have a full bullpen again going into Saturday's game. And if you're on Sunday, you've got A relievers that you've only used one time in the series and you're off on Monday, you might use some of your A relievers in different situations there. And I thought that might have been happening a little bit with the Twins on Sunday because they had a huge lead and they threw both Alcala and Emilio Pagan kind of in the middle late innings instead of the late innings. And I think that's more a case of we have a lead, we're going to protect it, and we're going to move on. But they're playing on Monday, so it wasn't a we have everyone available situation. Yeah. But I want to be aware of those things because I think they can mislead us.
My theory is that they had lost the first 2 games and they did not want to go 0-3. And so even if, there wasn't necessarily the need for the A bullpen, they were like, let's practice what a close win will look like. So my theory is that Alcala is the setup guy and Pagan is the closer. And that we saw a mini practice run, even though it's a 10-4 game, that's sort of how it sits right now. And Duran, John Duran, who like we talked about here, he has excellent stuff numbers. He's been near the top of the early list. I think he's their fireman. And so it is a little bit hard with him and Spencer Strider, these 2 pitchers that are like, wow, these guys, you watch them, you see them getting used, they're going to be huge for their teams. But for fantasy teams, unless you have saves plus holds, I think both of those guys are just going to be good pitchers that help their teams immensely and maybe not help your fantasy team. Because how many I would put Duran before, Alcala, right?
Yeah,
so, I mean, if they were winning a 2-1 game, I think it would go Duran, Alcala, Pagan.
I'm not as confident in Pagan's late inning role. I'm
not confident either, but I think that's I just think that's the order right now.
I do think this group of swingmen who they're clearly future starters, at least if health comes through. I think all of these guys are guys we're going to see in the rotation at some point, probably even later this season. Spencer Strider, Johan Duran, Clark Schmidt, Ronzi Contreras. I think we can all look at them and see what they do well and say, yes, we want these guys on our roster. The problem is the usage right now is not such that you can comfortably use them in all formats. I think the hard question you have to decide on is, are they good enough to justify an early season bench spot? Those spots are so precious. You're trying to turn over the roster spots. You're trying to find different ways to cover the holes in the bullpen or to find extra bench bats that might be playing more than expected. And you're looking at these names and you see them and you think about their prospect, their profile and their ceiling, and you want them on your team. And then when push comes to shove and you start thinking about actually putting them in the lineup for the week, they kind of seem like last resort. So you're not going to pass on a 2-start pitcher for any of those guys, at least a rosterable 2-start pitcher for those guys. But then if you have good streamable 1-start guys facing a bottom 5 team, are you actually going to sit one of those starters to possibly get 2 relief appearances from guys like Strider and Contreras and Schmidt and Duran? Like I think they're really tough players to roster, and I want them on my team, but I can't afford to have them on most of my teams.
Yeah. I think you have to pick one if you get one, and even that one is tough. But as an example, the place that I have chosen Strider over a 1-start pitcher, we just did, I think, whose lineups are about to lock, is in a draft and hold where my choices are Chris Paddock against the Dodgers and Reiver Sanmartin against the Dodgers.
Yeah, that's an easier situation to go with the.
It's like, well,
reliever,
Strider could come in here and give me 3-4 innings. Both of those guys could only give me 3-4 innings. Strider's not going to be against the Dodgers, hopefully, but which one is more likely to win? It actually might be Strider, because if Reiver or Paddock go 3 or 4, I don't think they're going 5 or 6 against the Dodgers. And Strider could be the kind of guy who comes in. I think that's how he's kind of settling in right now, is the guy who comes in, the first reliever, who comes in the 5th and the 6th. And that's actually a place to snag a W.
Yeah,
that's what
I'm
Leisiga used to do.
I'm looking at a guy like Kyle Hendricks this week, who I think just got shifted to face the Rockies. I got to verify that, but a schedule change like that
in Denver.
Yeah,
that's right. I'm sitting Stroman in some leagues.
Right. Those are easy sits, but I do think the Dodgers are a matchup you want to avoid. The Jays. The Jays offense did exactly what we thought the Jays offense was going to do throughout the season. They did it right away in the first series.
I put the Yankees on there, but at least Yankees in Yankee Stadium. Don't really want to throw your guys there.
Yeah, really want to avoid that if possible. What are you doing with some of these other matchups though? Like Sonny Gray has Boston, for example, this week. Like there's
in Boston, right?
In Boston. I generally like Sonny Gray, but this seems like it's on the short list of starts where I don't want to use him. I've got Severino on my bench at home against the Jays. Why? It's the rare time where I don't want to use Severino because he looks healthy. The underlying numbers were really good in that.
But it was only
outing.
3 innings, and it's a tough start.
Right, so you might not even be able to go 5, and it might be bad ratios without the chance of a win, even though strikeouts are kind of always there. But the Jays don't strike out much. So I was erring on the side of sitting both Severino and Sonny Gray, and that's not something I would do.
Strider type?
Yeah, for Strider types or even for committee relievers if it's just a general pitching slot, because it's one really tough start that I don't feel like I need to take the risk on right now. And I'm trying to decide, is that a mistake? Is that something I should actually be willing to take on because the higher volume of innings in one start might be the better play?
Yeah, that's a tough one. To continue the trend of bullpens that are hard to figure out though as well. There's Seattle, right? They just wanted to throw Seattle out there.
Yeah, Steckenrider got a save early in that series against the Twins, and he was hit hard in that converted save. Looked good on paper, didn't look good if you watched it. There was
it was like he's like the least favorite on my arms in there. I feel like
But it's one of those things where if they need to use better weapons to get to the 6th, 7th, and 8th, they will use someone else every single time, and he'll just be the guy that's left at the end. So in a Super Bowl pen, the 4th or 5th most talented reliever might be the guy that ends up getting more saves than you'd expect because they've got so many other better options to use when they're playing the matchups to get there.
I thought that might be Seawald, but the Stuff Plus model says he's the best, I think. Munoz always pops, but he also gave up a crazy homer to Buxton. Did you see that thing?
Monster.
101, about 3 inches above the strike zone. So like pretty much a pitcher's pitch.
Mm-hmm.
And Buxton took a yard, man. That guy's going to be good this year. I don't know. I think Diego Castillo is an interesting pickup. I put a couple bids in on him. I ended up winning Pagan, which I wasn't excited about, but I paid so little that I'm like, okay, what if that's the situation where Pagan is not the best pitcher in that bullpen, but he's the guy who gets the saves, Oh man, this stuff is really turning me around. But if I had to pick a fireman, just to finish it off, if I had to pick a fireman that I liked, it's Strider, because I think there's that Tucker Davidson role he could take. So I think that he could either end up being a 6th starter that's really good, or he could do the Jonathan Loaizaga thing where he has like 9 or 10 wins out of relief, So I think Strider's my favorite fireman. And in those bullpens, I kind of think my favorites right now are Pagan, Kittredge, and Diego Castillo.
Diego Castillo. Wow. Still, I mean, I until Ken Giles comes back, especially, I think it's pick your poison, choose whatever one you like best. I think Sewell is probably the most interesting to me. I'm trusting your model in that case. I think because they gave him enough opportunities down the stretch last year, a split could still favor him. And I think that's still carrying some weight for me. I think I'm with you on Strider being the best of those current firemen. If you're going to stash one, he was the guy that I was targeting this weekend. With Contreras, I was a little bit concerned. It was only 1 2/3 innings that he threw behind Mitch Keller. He looked pretty good. The command was a little spotty, but I don't think command's usually a problem for him. So I'm more of a let's see what happens the next couple times out and how much they stretch him out, because they may be trying to monitor his innings carefully, give him a little bit of a slow lead up, and then eventually he's going 5 more consistently. But we may have to wait a few weeks for it, and I think
he'll take Mitch Keller's job. Because Mitch Keller is throwing hard, but he did not change the shapes enough. And so the stuff model says he's still below average in stuff, despite that tick in velocity. And we know he doesn't have good command. And I don't know, like his appearance sort of 4 innings, 4 Ks, 4 walks. I don't know if that's going to get it done. So I think Contreras is headed towards Keller's spot. And of the firemen, I think he's got the most obvious starting spot. Like Duran, I think, is not going to start this year. Strider could start, probably relieve. I think Contreras is going to start. So if you're trying to hold on to someone that could be a starter, I think Contreras might actually still be a pretty good hold.
And I think Clark Schmidt is a little more of a question for me, because he's lost so much time with arm injuries that I think the Yankees are going to have to nurse him regardless of role. And I think it's easier to nurse a workload while still getting a lot of mileage out of someone if you're using him 2 or 3 innings at a time and not taxing the rest of the pitching staff in the process. You're using him when someone else falls a little short, or when someone gets to the 4th or the 5th and you just want to give the short relievers a breather because Schmidt's rested. I think that's where I'm at in terms of how I expect him to be used in the short term, even though the long term future could still be very
probably
bright.
Starter, yeah. Good dynasty pickup, good guy to like. If you're going to nurse, these are great. All of these are great dynasty pickups if they're still available. Clark is probably the most likely to be available, but I think they might all be gone in deeper dynasties. But even in sort of 12 and 15, if they're or like keeper situations, they're all like, if you're going to keep one pitcher that you don't know, that this is the list, right? Strider, Contreras, Schmidt. This is the list of really exciting young arms that just don't have the role that make them pop and are worth kind of maybe nursing along. Pick your favorite and go with it. But or pick one, whoever's available at this point, I guess. But I do find those guys fun. I just wanted to. I just got a dump before a stats dump before the podcast started. So this is through Sunday. I wanted to just highlight the best 10 starting pitchers by Stuff Plus. No surprise, number one is Hunter Green with 135 Stuff Plus. He blew the doors off. Shohei Ohtani at 130. And now here's the biggest surprise. This is partially why I'm doing this. Tyler Wells had a 129 Stuff Plus.
What?
He did poorly. It's not location. People were hunting the fastball and hitting it. But this is enough for me to hold in deeper leagues. Like, I'm holding Tyler Wells for at least one more start. Garrett Cole, he had a higher Stuff Plus than Garrett Cole. Garrett Cole 125, Corbin Burns 124, Shane McClanahan was as good as he looked, 121. Frankie Montas had a bad start, but it was a 118 Stuff Plus. Yu Darvish 118, and I think Yu Darvish is new. He has a new sort of a way of bringing the ball up in the back, a new sort of arm path in the back. I thought he looked really good. 96 location plus is about all you can expect from him. But I thought he looked really good. I thought Darvish, that was a great start for him. Carlos Rodon, 117. Tanner Houck, 117. So mostly expected players, but then a couple of surprises, I think, in Montas and Wells.
Yeah, I would say maybe Houck was a little bit of a surprise too. I don't remember the model like being down on him at all last year, but I just think that was a really tough matchup for him going into Yankee Stadium for his first start. And
bad locations.
I mean, last year he was great against righties. I think Houck is really important for the Red Sox, especially with Sale down, just as a guy that has to pitch really well if they're going to keep it together in that group of starting five, and probably someone that in leagues where you can make trades isn't valued quite as much as he should be. He might be one of the better starters you can actually go make a reasonable deal for right now. So I'd be intrigued by him because I think if you got excess pitching and Houck's on your roster,
might be on that list too. Montas might be on that list too, like acquirable. Maybe the person doesn't think there's a lot of wins on the table for them. He's had the suspension. He's had bad stretches. They could be like, oh, here it goes again.
That Wells thing is really surprising, though. I know he did well in the model last year as a reliever. I didn't think he would go up with Stuff Plus. It was a very tough matchup for him, though, the first time out against the Rays. Let's get to this observation from opening weekend. The Burley Beef Boys batting leadoff. We saw Daniel Vogelbach get the leadoff spot for the Pirates on opening day. We saw Kyle Schwarber leadoff and homer for the Phillies. I believe that was on opening day against Oakland as well. And this led one of our listeners, Sam, to ask us if we have any statistical insight on the Burley Beef Boys batting leadoff, or perhaps any clubhouse team chemistry insight. What would be the reasoning for having hitters like this in that spot? Whereas, I think Sam, as many of us expects, OBP speed guys are typically where our minds go when we're looking for players to be atop the order. This is a very different look for a few teams.
Yes. I hesitate to say it's a full-on trend, but I did want to play It's Trivia Time. It's Trivia Time. It's time for you to do the trivia because I'm bad at it. So
Derek, well.
Who are the top 5 heaviest leadoff hitters of all time? I'm going to say all time, but it's the free agency era.
The free agency era, top 5 heaviest. I mean, Vogelbach is probably one.
He was the 4th biggest.
Yeah, I figured if you made top 5, he was probably in it. Okay,
yeah.
So one for one. This is where the movie takes a horrible turn. How about John Jaha?
Whoa.
I'm assuming that's a no. Not on your list.
I had to go check real quick on the tallest of all time. He's not on that.
Yeah, I think he was a little more stout than tall. Yeah, a little more stout. I'll take one more guess before we let you reveal the list. I'm trying to think of one more large hitter. How about How about Miguel Sano mysteriously leading off the game?
Bam! Well done. Yes, Miguel Sano is actually 2 pounds heavier than Vogelbach, according to the listings. And so he would slot in at third. Number one heaviest leadoff hitter of all time was one of the podcast favorites, Adam Dunn.
Adam Dunn led off. Okay, yeah, big
Adam
OBP.
Dunn,
I can see it.
Listed at 285, had 15 games. And then the next one only had 1 game. Snow only had 2 games. That was a good pull. The next one only had 1 game, plays for the Yankees.
Current Yankee?
Yeah.
Stanton?
Aaron Judge.
I guess Judge is Judge heavier than Stanton? They're both large.
Yeah, he's bigger.
Judge is taller, right?
282 on Judge. And then because I had this done before Vogelbach, I have the other 2 behind them. G-Man Choi had 18 games. Of course, the Rays would have someone like this at 260. And then Luke Voigt had 6 games at leadoff at 255. Just for fun, Aaron Judge is the tallest leadoff hitter of all time at 79 inches. Adam Dunn is the second tallest. Giancarlo Stanton, it says here, is only an inch shorter than Aaron Judge.
Yeah, I guess that's about right. I've seen pictures of them standing next to each other. They're just both large humans.
Large. Stanton is the third largest of all time. And then just some fun names: John Mayberry, Jose Martinez, and then Corey Hart had 161 games. That's where it really counts. Corey Hart is actually the start of all this. Actually, kind of is. He did have some speed.
Yeah, Corey Hart could run. Hart. He could run pretty well for a tall guy, especially. I mean, he ran well regardless of height.
Good. I thought Corey Hart was going to be a superstar.
Is that back around the time he started playing?
Night guy too, or was that just a Corey thing?
No, he was a sunglasses at night guy for his walk-up music at one point.
Yeah,
fairly certain.
But I as far as it is a trend, I would just say that 2 things are happening. Is we're not emphasizing steals as much in the game anymore, and so there's just not as many fast leadoff hitters. And then secondly, I think that the game is just played differently. Like the idea of combining OBP and speed at the top of the lineup, it gives you this idea of like, oh, maybe he can get on and then steal second, and then maybe we can scratch out a run, right? Baseball doesn't play like that anymore. We don't try to scratch out runs. We're trying to put up a real crooked number. We're trying to get to a 5 or a 6. We're not trying to get to a 1. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I think what's happening is there is speed in the game still, but I think it's been relegated a little bit to like 5th, 6th, 7th in the lineup. You actually see speedsters lower in the lineup. And I think what happens is those guys end up coming up and maybe getting on in the 6th or 7th when you actually start playing for 1 run. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's a little bit about like when people come up, because if you're the leadoff hitter, you only lead off once.
Right.
Right.
I mean, you could lead off again later, but there's no guarantee. The order's different.
Right. So what happens in the first inning? Everyone's trying to go for the crooked number. No one's like trying to sacrifice. I mean, other than like the Royals kind of went hard on this. Did you notice that?
Yeah,
they did 2 sacrifice bunts in like the 5th and 6th, and I was just like, come on, guys.
Victor Robles, I believe, tried to bunt during that series against the Mets. He just gone. I'm so out on Vic. It's over. It's over between us. The relationship has ended.
I co-manage a team, and Robles still pops because he's got 7 games and he's going to have a lot of plate appearances. But I was like, should he be in our starting lineup? And I guess he's going to be in our starting lineup for 1 more week at least.
For some reason, he doesn't want to swing the bat, and because of that, I am out on Victor Robles officially. Mark it down. Monday, April 11th, 2022, DVR gives up on Victor Robles. Took about 2 years longer than it should have, but I have given up. Good question, though, Sam. Thank you for passing that along, and for the congrats to Britt as well for the upcoming addition to her family. If you saw the 3-0 show last week, that news was passed along. We're really excited about that. Let's get to a few more topics here. I was curious what you thought about in-season management tools. I've got 11 teams this season where I have to set a lineup. So my Mondays and Fridays and a few other days are pretty busy trying to just navigate all these things. And we've talked about, I think, in-season projections being out there, but not being as prevalent as you'd expect them to be, given how much we rely on full season projections for so much of the year. I mean, from October until opening day, full season projections are half of what we talk about, it feels like. And then the calendar flips to April, and we don't talk that much about week-to-week projections. So you've mentioned the Razzball in-season projections in the past as one that have been out there. Are there any other tools you're using for hitters, especially trying to make these smaller decisions on a week-to-week or even a day-to-day sort of basis?
Yeah, no, I'm going mostly with the Razzball. And what I like about it is it does help me with those decisions we were talking about, where it's like one bad matchup for a starter versus Spencer Strider for out of the bullpen. So I do like that. And then also I think it's just hard sometimes when you're looking at a guy who's got 5 games, in 2 parks, and then another guy who's got 7 games who might be a lesser offensive player. It's the same sort of decision where it's like, do I want the 5 games of the better player or the 7 games of the worst player? And that's why Victor Robles pops as like a positive value, is because he's got those 7 games, and like it's him versus like Cole Calhoun, in our decision-making process. And, he pops way ahead of Cole Calhoun, who has 5 games, I believe, and also may not start all 5.
Cole Calhoun can hit more barrels as a part-time player in a 5-game week than Victor Robles is going to hit all season. So just think about that. I've been sitting with that for a couple of years, and that's the truth.
You're bitter now.
So bitter. I went
always going to end up this way.
You knew it was going to end this way, but I went from thinking about getting the Robles signed jersey.
You still were drafting him. So what happened in the last 3 days, dude? It's in 3 days. You were still drafting him.
One team, only one.
You got 1 share? Okay.
I have him on 1 team, and it was very early in draft season.
This pill has been turning to bitter for a while.
Yeah, I just looked at it. I'm like, come on, man. Like this isn't right. Like you showed these skills in 2019 and then just abandoned your process, I guess. Anyone who wants to bunt that much has no place on my roster. That's it. That's the simple rule.
Yeah, I mean, come on, Kansas City, dude. It was painful.
I don't like the way they are trying to play. Even I like their team. I like their roster. I do not like their tactics. Their tactics are very frustrating. Their tactics are so outdated. Like for the roster they have, they are playing the wrong way.
Yeah. One nice thing was that Brad Keller finally threw more 4-seamers than 2-seamers and sinkers, so, and the 4-seam has a bunch of cut on it. So he could actually be this weird cut fastball slider guy. Still was a 2-pitch pitcher and still threw the sinker a fair amount, and still part of that whole Kansas City rotation that throws way too many stinkers, dude. Just so many stinkers. And I just wonder sometimes if there's like one guy in R&D in Kansas City who's just like, please listen to me. It's like a Molman. Is it Hans Molman? Please listen to me. And the Royals just keep like running him over and like slapping him down.
Gets hit by the bullpen cart walking around in the concourse into the stadium.
I've got the numbers. You shouldn't be throwing these sinkers, please.
Yeah, that's probably what's happening if I had to ballpark it. On the pitching side, you've talked about pitching plus, the model being very good at quickly showing you things that might not be very apparent on the surface. Your Tyler Wells example illustrates that perfectly. But what else are you looking at? Is there anything that people can see on the outside? If they can't see pitching plus right now, what should people be looking at with pitchers on a start-by-start basis early in the year as they're trying to decide whether or not they can trust people in difficult spots, or if they want to even hold on to some guys that might be off to bad starts who are not in that ace caliber? We talked about aces earlier. You're holding those guys, Bieber, Urías, Woodruff, anyone at that caliber, they could struggle for a month and you're still going to be holding them. But for
Yeah.
the bottom half of your roster pitchers, especially, those are really tough pitchers to make decisions on, both lineup wise and even on off the roster in smaller leagues.
Yeah, it's true. I guess the bottom of the list could be more useful to people. What I will do is update the spring training. There's a Google Doc on the spring training stuff numbers piece. I will update that. I'll throw in the weekend's numbers there. And I will promise you that there are now two. I don't want to get into too much detail about it, but there's two options on the table for Pitching Plus that will come to a head some point this season, some point soonish, where you will have some sort of filterable leaderboard situation. So I can promise you that. I'm sorry that it hasn't happened yet. It has to do with companies buying companies and legal, and it was a crazy off season. You know what I mean? Like maybe you can understand how something like this could have fallen between the cracks at the Athletic in this off season. But at the bottom of Stuff Plus, just do starters at the bottom. Jake Odorizzi with a 69. That is not nice. Ian Anderson with a 72. But that's a tough one because people are going to hold, right? And the model never liked him when he was good.
It never liked him, and I thought he had a minor injury coming into the start to a toe injury. He had a blister.
Okay. All right. Well, let's TBD on him, I guess. I have very few shares because the model didn't like him, but Patrick Corbin with a 74. And I think he had an okay start, right?
He didn't pitch terribly. It wasn't last year Patrick Corbin, 450, 175. It was 4 Ks in 4 innings, 2 earned, 5 hits, 2 walks.
I mean, if that's enough to sell him, I'd sell him.
I don't know if anyone's buying there. I think that's more of a on the roster, off the roster situation.
Yeah. So, I do think that is a helpful thing to notice, because you might think, do I keep Corbin now? Or is he a streamer? Is that just a fluid spot? And I'm saying I lean towards fluid spot. Cal Quantrill, the model never liked him, but he had a good start. He had a 79 Stuff Plus in that start. I actually think that there's a possibility for movement, because I know that there was a lot of reaction to his ranking in my ranks. So there are a lot of people who think Cal Quantrill is really good. So I would try to move him if I could. Dane Dunning was adding a sweeper, and he had an 81 Stuff Plus. So I don't know. The start wasn't that great either. So I think you just keep on motoring on that one. And then there was the Tony Gonsolin, Tyler Anderson situation. That was interesting. I think they're kind of almost battling for that one spot. Tony Gonsolin showed an 82 Stuff Plus. So, maybe it's Tyler Anderson that comes away with that. And then Luke Weaver had an 84 Stuff Plus before he went down for injury. So if you're debating keeping him on the roster or moving on, I think you can move on.
I can't figure out why they are starting Caleb Smith again this year. It seemed like he was clearly in the bullpen, and they started him and he got hit, and Corbin Martin followed him in relief. And I think Martin, at least just from a pitch mix and velocity standpoint, looked a lot better than he did last year. So I wonder if Corbin Martin is finally going to get that opportunity.
It's a little bit like maybe like the Gonsolin Tyler Anderson situation, where they just have two pitchers in the same spot, and like one of them's going to win the job. Mm-hmm. Corbin Martin had a 105 Stuff Plus, so I think that was a very good start for him. And in 74 pitches, like to have a similar Stuff Plus to Sandy Alcantara, I think that's pretty good. So yeah. That would be a sneaky pickup right now too, because he's not going to show up on he won't look good in the Rasball thing, right? Because he won't have an actual projected start. They'll just probably give him 3 innings of reliever type stuff. But there is that, like, he is in that sort of Clark Schmidt area where he's like a good pitcher, but rather like Clark Schmidt's probably not going to start. I think Corbin Martin is headed towards starting, and I think Caleb Smith is headed towards not starting.
I think it makes them both a lot more interesting. I think Caleb Smith as a reliever could be good. Extra ticks on the fastball would change a lot for him. Not having to go as deep into that pitch mix would change a lot for Caleb Smith.
He doesn't have really good command. He doesn't have a deep arsenal.
Yeah. So just going down to 2 pitches, just working out of the pen with extra velo. I think that could actually be pretty good. The tool I like to use, it's a paywall tool, but I like the RotoWire projected starters grid because I can look at it. I can also upload my teams into their system, and it'll highlight pitchers that are available. It'll highlight the ones that are rostered. It highlights mine in a different color, so I can quickly run through it, look at matchups, try and figure out if there are upgrades available. And I like using that same tool just to get a sense for matchups on the hitting side. Someone like Cody Bellinger coming off of a rough weekend in Colorado, was swinging at pitches outside the zone a lot. I think he had like a 67% O swing percentage in the series, which it's one series, but
he's
given the spring that he had, he's still
didn't
pretty
strike out a
lost.
lot.
No, but chasing pitches outside the zone in a place where stuff doesn't move as much, that's a little bit of a concern. So he's kind of in this hybrid problem player guy where now I'm looking at the schedule for him, and I think I'm giving him one more shot this week because the back end starters are going at the beginning of the week. But I think as we look ahead to future weeks, if we see a couple of lefties on for a portion of the week, he might be on my bench depending on what's going on with everybody else and whether or not he shows some signs of life. But so far, we're not seeing it in the very, very small bit of sample we've got from Cody Bellinger to this point. But I'm just looking for ways to basically manage the schedule, because that's volume is everything in weekly leagues, and trying to make sure that I'm not missing out on opportunities to maximize playing time is really important to me. Got a question here from Doug. Doug would like to know, what specific stats do you use to tease out plate discipline and quality of contact? Doug writes, I know the ozone stat on Fangraphs portrays plate discipline. Do you look at hard hit percentage or barrel rate for quality of contact? Your preferred way to isolate both. So how do you handle plate discipline and quality of contact?
Well, I do think that my favorite stats, I mean, we talk about this a lot, and it's like it's in the name, dude. The rates and barrels, like we love barrels here, and we love, I call it reach rate. Some people call it chase rate. You can call it O swing. Those are probably my 2 favorite stats on the hitting side. The only problem is that you kind of want 50 balls in play on barrels. And I haven't seen like actual researched evidence of this, but I would assume that hard hit rate is a little bit more meaningful early and maybe less meaningful later. Because if you think about it, hard hit rate is just, did you hit the ball 95? So the denominator is, you're not slicing away stuff as much. You're just saying, did you hit the ball 95? And I think you can more quickly get a sense of who's hitting the ball hard. It is better to hit the ball hard in the air, and there will be a difference between that. And that will become meaningful, but it becomes meaningful about a month in, right? 50 balls in play. It's like a month plus in. But if I was looking at somebody who didn't have a barrel yet, because that's what we're talking about, right? We're like a week into the season, might not have a barrel rate yet, but that doesn't mean he's gonna have a 0% barrel rate, right?
No, of course not.
Especially if they have like a good, like, what is it, 40, 45, 40? What's a good hard hit rate? Like
40s.
50 is really good.
40s are good.
Yeah, 40s is good. So if they have a mid 40s hard hit rate and no barrels yet, like I'm not panicking yet.
Yeah, I think those are where I tend to go as well. I mean, the O swing percentage, I think once we get about 2 to 3 weeks in, that's when I start to look at that and feel like we're seeing something that could be alarming or a sign of improvement. You start to see enough over about 4 to 5 series where you can start to begin to say, hey, look, this might actually be a different player. This might be some skills growth that we're seeing.
Right. And it's not like some guys are just like, oh, I'm just going to have a totally passive approach this year. And it doesn't always work for every guy, right? Like some guys don't have a great sense of the zone and they're just not swinging. And so what I like to do is, like, about a month in, you can start to pair like results, like K percentage and walk percentage results with a skill change, with like a change in approach, right? So like if the guy's just striking out a ton and his reach rate is down, it might not be good for him. He might be being too passive because he doesn't have a great sense of the zone. But it really works out well. Like, it's even now you can look and see that Seiya Suzuki is number 1 in reach rate. That's kind of meaningful to me because it means that his plate discipline is porting over. Like he is as disciplined as we thought he was. And Stephen Kwan being there is like, okay, yes, these guys do have a really, really good sense of the zone. I have no reason to not believe in Stephen Kwan, and I have no reason to not believe in Seiya Suzuki. Right? That's how it can help a little bit. It's like, oh, Stephen Kwan, just a hot start. Well, the process stuff looks like he's got a really good sense of the zone. He's always made a lot of contact. So maybe we can put this up to like a 300 batting average, 350 OBP. Maybe it's only going to be like a 420 slugging.
That was going to be my question with Stephen Kwan. Of course, got a lot of attention coming off a huge game over the weekend, but how much power can we reasonably forecast for him looking at what he had done in the minor leagues? I mean, he popped 3 homers in 2019 at high A. That was in 542 plate appearances. Double A in 2021, spent some time there, 7 homers in 51 games, and then 5 more in 26 games at Triple A a year ago as well. So you're talking about 12 in about 77 games in the minors. That's not a bad power output relative to his age and those levels. How much do you trust that, though, against top-level pitching, given that we're talking about a guy that still hasn't done that for a very long time?
Yeah. Yeah, and right now he has a 200 ISO, so it looks better than it is, though, because that's mostly based off of doubles, right? Mm-hmm. He's got 2 doubles. How many homers is he going to hit, though? That's the question. He's got a 40% hard hit rate, 10% barrel rate. There's aforementioned awesome league-leading type reach rates, like a 12% reach rate right now. It's awesome. I doubt it'll stay that low, but still awesome. The power, though, the one thing that sticks out on me is a 103 max EV. We're in an impossibly small sample, but he does have 10 balls in play, because he puts the ball in play a lot. 10 balls in play, 103. Let me just.
It's pretty low.
Look at it. Yes, it is low. And
that's a low max exit velo.
We try not to make too big a deal out of max exit velo because there are some studies out there that show it doesn't have that much predictive power, but I do think it's a really good descriptor of raw power. Now, do you tap into your raw power or make the most of your lower raw power? That's why I think it hasn't been proven to have a ton of weight as a statistic, but I do think it's a descriptive statistic that tells us something about raw power. So raw power 103. Why is this on pitchers? That was awful.
That would have been last among qualified hitters last year.
It would have been.
Josh Rojas. Yeah, it would have been below Rojas.
105, 104.6.
Yeah.
And like, put aside the fact that it's not that descriptive, not that powerful of a metric, apparently, because of some research out there, and just look at the bottom by max EV, and I don't know, man. It seems like it's kind of powerful. Josh Rojas, Kyle Farmer, Mark Canha, Whit Merrifield, Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, Nicky Lopez, David Fletcher, Josh Harrison, Adam Frazier. That's your bottom, dude.
Yeah. If you open it up to...
None of those guys had any power.
If you get to 100 batted ball events, then you get some other names that show up on the bottom of the list. But it doesn't mean he's not a big leaguer. It doesn't mean he's not a good hitter. It just means the power ceiling really might be low to mid-teens.
What people said it was. Yeah,
right. It might be 13 to 16 home runs and nothing more, but it might come with a good average, a great OBP, a high spot in the lineup, and a boatload of runs scored. And then it comes down to, well, if he's not hitting for as much power as we want, is he running a little bit? Is he a 6 to 8 steals guy? That would make a dent in some deeper leagues at least. But I just think he's one of those players that's off to a great start. People in shallow leagues are probably scrambling to pick him up, and he might be a better real-life player than he is a fantasy player in leagues that use the typical 5x5 categories.
Yeah. The only thing I have to say in response, though, is that batting average is just a really tough statistic. So I do think he'll provide good value this year, just based even in one category. If you can trade him for somebody who's more of a 5 category stud that might also have a batting average, or that had a bad first weekend or something, like if you can do the hype trade, more power to you. But if you're listening to this and your league mates are listening to this, I doubt you can really turn Stephen Kwan into like a Jose Ramirez or something. You know what I mean? I have seen a straight up trade for Andrew Vaughn What's the would you rather on that one for you?
I would take Vaughn over Kwan. Better lineup, much better power pedigree for Vaughn. Because I don't think Kwan's going to run that much. You're not getting that much more in that category. And I'll take the guy maybe hitting 6th or 7th for the White Sox as almost as good for run production as the guy that probably hit 2nd in Cleveland. It's a good White Sox lineup. It's a great White Sox lineup.
Yeah.
How about you? Are you on the Kwan side of that one?
I don't know. I think I might be. It's not like if I'm running a real life team. No, I'd rather have Vaughn.
Interesting, because I feel like real life might make it closer for me. Like I think the roles are reversed. Yeah. How many
Kwan's
players?
Not a center fielder.
No,
so
but
you're basically comparing 2 corner outfielders, and one has power and OBP, and the other one just has OBP.
I'm really intrigued by someone that makes as much contact as Stephen Kwan does, even if it comes with a lot less power. Like I think that's a fun player that the league as a whole probably devalues, right? We talked about having diversification of hitter profiles in a lineup. I think if you're trying to accomplish that, that's really interesting. I think at the end of the day, because of the scouting grades on Vaughn, the pedigree there, like, yes, okay, I would take Vaughn if you made me choose, but I think I'm looking at the problem differently outside of a 5x5 league because of some of the things that Stephen Kwan can do. I like Andrew Vaughn a lot for whatever that's worth, but he's not a good defender, and he should be playing first base, which he could do in the world of you're running a team and you have your choice. Well, you can play Andrew Vaughn in his natural position, so his defense is less of a problem than trying to gem in right field.
Right. Yeah. I think Kwan, like in Boston, would be an amazing fit there. Just some of these teams that have a lot of strikeouts that could use someone that could sort of one man change it up kind of guy. I don't think that Kwan in Kansas City does much for them. You know, they have the 3rd lowest strikeout rate, and that's he just wouldn't add as much to that team, I don't think. No. In terms of, so it is a little bit different, I think, from team to team and from fantasy team to fantasy team, because he might single-handedly keep Christian Pache in my lineup in labor. Between the two of them, I might have one good player. In terms of fantasy value, I think I want Kwan because I think batting average is so hard to protect. It's so hard to keep high. I think it's easier to find Andrew Vaughn types. Like, what is he, a 250-25 type, right? Doesn't that seem like there's going to be somebody that pops on the waiver wire like that? Like, couldn't Connor Joe do that?
I think all this comes back to how much more power you expect from Vaughn this year. If you think Vaughn's getting to 25 to 30 home runs, that becomes a much more difficult profile to find.
Mm-hmm. But if it's more 20 to 25...
I think Vaughn's just better. I think you're going to get more homers. Yeah, you're going to lose batting average. You're going to win homers. You're probably going to push on runs. You're going to win RBIs.
You'll lose steals, but by like 2 or 3, maybe.
A negligible loss in steals unless Kwan ends up running a lot more than expected. So I guess all that's to say is I'm pretty bullish on Vaughn coming off a 2-homer weekend in his opening series. We've got a Dear Abby style question here. It's not addressed to an Abby or anyone in particular, but been reading that the Astros are in love with Hector Neris and are worried about Ryan Presley's velocity, which was a late spring storyline that actually did hold up through opening weekend. Ryan Presley's velo down 3 miles per hour on his 4-seamer from where it was last year. So that's definitely worth monitoring. What is it that the model doesn't particularly like about Neris? And is there a chance just getting out of Philly and away from the defense with the Phillies closes the gap between his actual and generally much better expected numbers? Thanks. Desperate for saves in New Hampshire.
That's an interesting observation, because Ryan Presley did have a 91 stuff plus in his start, and that's the sound of my stomach dropping, because I have a fair amount of shares, and I thought he was pretty safe, even if he lost a little bit of velo. But no reliever is safe once you lose velo. Hector Neris has a 118 stuff plus which is right there with Joan Duran, who we like, and also there with AJ Minter, just to give you some, and Blake Trinan, just a little bit short of Blake Trinan. So he's in a good spot. I don't know. Maybe it's already happened. I don't know that they had to do much. I think it was just, I think that Hector Neris is one of those guys. Like I remember Jose Leclerc, where it's just that the command isn't great, the stuff is great, and then in any given season, the command can get better just for a season for whatever reason, and that might be just all that they were betting on. I do see that he threw more four-seamers in this last start for his last appearance for the Astros than he had. Got to switch over from month to game here on Brooks Baseball. Wow. It was like a top 10 number of fastballs for his career or any appearance in terms of percentage of fastballs thrown. So maybe that's the idea. They're just like, you can command your fastball better. It's a good fastball. Just keep throwing your fastball and then throw the splitter in the middle of the zone.
I think that's a pretty good adjustment. And
Right.
Our change is going to lower the home run rate. Throwing more fastballs could lower the walk rate. And then suddenly we're looking at Neris and going, whoa, this guy is really good. Why'd the Phillies, a team with bullpen trouble, not want to keep him around? The thing that complicates this, dear desperate, I don't understand why Ryan Presley got that 2-year extension in the midst of being down in Velo. And I worry that having received that 2-year extension, maybe the Astros will be a little more patient with him than they would have been had he not signed that. They're a smart team. They're not going to sit there forever and just keep trotting him out there if things start to go wrong. But a 3-mile-per-hour drop in velocity is massive. That is an alarming loss of velocity for a reliever. So I would watch very closely throughout the week. And in situations where we're speculating for saves, Neris might be out there in a decent number of leagues. He's probably right on that borderline of, if you're stashing a reliever hoping to get someone who becomes a closer, he would be on that list for sure.
Why not Stanek?
Could be. I mean, I'm not surprised that a team like the Astros has more than one viable replacement for Ryan Presley. That shouldn't surprise anyone.
What was the order here that they used them? They lost. They used Stanek in a loss. That's interesting. The Verlander loss. And they used Neris. What's Neris? Neris has played 2 games.
They won 2, so I'm guessing, he probably pitched in both the wins.
Yes. Montero? This box score is not in consecutive order. I need to look at the play log.
Well,
Neris pitched the 8th. There you go. Pitched the 8th in a win. So it's Neris, not Stanek. Good.
Mystery solved.
In front of everybody. It's embarrassing.
Well, hey, look, sometimes you got to show everyone the process.
Yeah, I do think that role is super important. I think all these things like stuff and K percentage can tell you something, but that could be sort of the overarching theme of this podcast today, is that, we talk through some of these really exciting firemen. We talk through some of these really exciting 8th inning, 7th inning guys. And no matter what you think of Duran's stuff or Strider's stuff or Schmidt's stuff or Neris versus Stanek, role, like how they've been used is super important. Stuff like what Mike Curlin does at the Athletic, and looking at lineup spots and looking at usage in the bullpen, like Greg Jewett does. Like, those things are super important. They can be more important than any one model or any one sort of, I'm going to use velocity or strikeouts to figure this out. You got to, if you have some sort of approach and I'm going to use stuff plus, or I'm going to use velocity and strikeouts, you got to look at the game logs. You got to look at how they were being used, because Duran may have the best stuff in that Twins bullpen, but I just don't see him as the closer right now.
There was one other question that came in about Cody Bellinger that I thought was interesting, because it was a Stratomatic question. And if you're not familiar with Strat, you play with the previous year's stats. So you already know that Cody Bellinger's card for last year isn't good, but it's a keeper league. So the trade is a 1-for-1 swap. And it's our listener, Justin, who is from his words, sadly, Florida. Not sadly, comma, Florida. But that
Although
was
there
just
should
really...
be a city in Florida called Sadly.
There could be a sadly in just about every state, to be
That's
fair.
right.
Even the states I've lived in, I could say there could be a sadly part of those states.
100%.
So looking at the Bellinger versus Eovaldi in this context, where you have the answer key, you saw what they both did in 2021, and that's in the bank if you make this trade, where you're getting the better player for Eovaldi, and then you're just betting on the future of Bellinger either not bouncing back or Eovaldi staying healthy and being effective for a few years to make the trade with your while. Defense also matters in strat too. Bellinger's a good defender in center field, so you do get that value. What would you do in a situation like that? Thinking about the long term, thinking about the age, thinking about the differences in these two players, but knowing that you've got one clearly better season from Eovaldi already coming your way if you make that trade.
I make it. I mean, that's the way I play. Is I'm almost always going to trade the pitcher for the hitter, and in this case, it's the older pitcher for the younger hitter.
Okay, so you're on the Bellinger side of this one, even with one very good season from Eovaldi in the bag and one pretty bad season from Bellinger that you're going to have to eat on the card.
Yeah.
Still buying the dip, even with 1 year cooked in, which I just thought that added another wrinkle that I hadn't even thought about. Strat's one of those things that someday, probably when I'm retired, I'll play Strat. When I retire from my job as a baseball talker guy, then I'll play that particular baseball game. It'll be a lot of fun.
Why? Because it's more effort, more time, more.
Well, because I'll be able to sit in one of those big, comfortable chairs on a. We'll get together a couple times a week and play Strat, and we'll just hit the spinner. And we're not playing on a computer. We're going to have an old,
that's the
version.
problem, right? You need actual time in your life,
right? But when I have more time in the future. Thanks a lot for the questions. A lot of good stuff coming in. You want to send us a question for the mailbag, ratesandbarrels@theathletic.com. We will be answering more questions now that the season has started, because it's that time of year. If there's things you're curious about what matters this time of year, what doesn't, anything at all is fair game. Send those our way. On Twitter, you can find Eno at Saris. You can find me at Derek Van Riper. If you don't already have a subscription to The Athletic, get one for $1 a month for the first 6 months at theathletic.com/Rates and Barrels. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We are back with you on Thursday.
Thanks for listening.